Well, first of all, thank you. Thanks to everyone for coming. There's a wide cross section of folks in the room here right now, so I hope that you took an opportunity to meet someone new. These are some really interesting and amazing folks who are in the room. And again, thank you on behalf of Community Music Center of Boston. We really appreciate you coming to engage in this particular conversation with us. This is a conversation that many of you who are engaged at, working alongside some of these organizations, you know that the organizations that are represented here, there's a lot that's happening. We're trying to do some new and creative and innovative things. We're trying to think about this city in a very different way. We're trying to think about the communities that we exist in and activating them in new and unique ways. And when my team, when we started to think about who were some folks who we could bring into this conversation, the list was actually quite easy to come up with because these are three dynamic and amazing leaders who I have gotten to know, and they also run these really important organizations in the city. Some of them have citywide communities. Some of them have worldwide communities. Some of us are focused in very specific and particular neighborhoods. But one of the things that we found out in our preliminary conversations is that we're having some of the same challenges. We're having the same conversations. Our communities are interested in being part of the same evolution of this city. And so it's really exciting for us to be able to come together and share with you some of the things that we were talking about. I'll begin by having folks introduce themselves. I'll have a little bit of a conversation with them, but exciting part of this will be the things that come from you all. I have a few questions from some of our youth employees. For those of you who are not familiar with Community Music Center Boston, we have a very thriving youth employment program where we're working with young people all over the city, and they're working inside our organization. They're not filling up envelopes. I mean, they are doing real work and getting real experience working with us. And so they have put together some actually very difficult questions for you. I'm not going to answer them. I'll leave them to you to answer them because they are some pretty interesting. This will be a lightning round for you, I think. But I'll also invite them to share some of their questions themselves. So again, I will start by Lecolion Washington is my name. I'm the executive director at the Community Music Center of Boston. I am now in year 8. For those of you who don't know about Community Music Center of Boston, a few blocks away, we bought the Hamel Gallery, Nubian Gallery building about a couple of blocks away. And so our headquarters, which is currently in the South End, we're now going to be expanding our organization into this particular neighborhood in that building just a few blocks away. And since I'm talking about things that are from a proximal perspective, I'll turn over to Aisha, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about yourself. Sure. And about the amazing thing that you have going on right now.
Thank you, Lecolion, for the invitation. Yes, give it up for Lecolion.
Oh.
My name is Aisha Francis. I am the president and CEO of Franklin Cummings Tech, which is a 2-year technical college that is currently at 41 Berkeley Street. We are moving to Roxbury. And the fascinating thing is that we are currently across the street from Community Music Center of Boston, and we will continue to be across the street from Community Music Center of Boston, which is a wonderful, wonderful serendipitous, way that we've both landed. And I can tell you more about our organization, our college, as we get into the conversation, but I have been in leadership at the college for 7 years. I've been the president for 5 years, and we serve more than 1,000 students a year in technical and trade fields such as automotive repair and HVAC, practical electricity, things that are in high demand in the greater Boston area and that AI won't replace anytime soon. So I'm looking forward to being in conversation with you all tonight.
Thanks. Thank you, Aisha. Vanessa, I would love to jump in and ask you to share also being, running an amazing organization and actually having some physical transformation as well.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Can you hear me? Okay. So thank you for the invitation and to be amongst two good friends and you and everyone else. My name is Vanessa Calderón-Rosado. I am the Chief Executive Officer of IBA. Inquilinos Boricuas en Acción, which is a nationally recognized community development corporation in the South End, just about a mile away from here, neighbors with a community music center and the Franklin Commons Tech Institute. But we have been around since 1968. Which was happened through the community organizing of a group of Puerto Rican activists that created IBA to revitalize the neighborhood of the South End and create housing. So almost 60 years later, we continue with that work of preserving and creating affordable housing with 667 units of housing in our portfolio. But also as important as housing it was and still is for the city and for the state, our founders felt that comprehensive programming around housing and community building and development was important. So we do have an early education program, bilingual early education program, youth development, resident services, financial empowerment, and the arts. Because from the beginning, our founders felt that not only arts are important to celebrate our history, but also to build community. It's an important tool for building community. So that's kind of the work that we do at IBA, and really using arts and education through each one of our programs and housing developments.
Thank you for that. Please.
Thank you.
A lot of you are connected to arts organizations, so I will invite you to applaud very regularly. You don't have to wait until the end of the piece. You can applaud between movements here at Community Music Center Boston. Knock yourselves out. Chad, you're the new guy. So, some of us have been parts of our organizations, but you have already made, I think, some astounding progress as it relates to the Boston Symphony. So I'd love for you to just share with us a little bit about yourself and the Boston Symphony and what your vision would be as you're thinking of it moving forward.
So first, I will echo my colleagues' thanks to you for organizing this and bringing us together. I've been in Boston with the Boston Symphony now for about 20 months, and one of the things that I will say is one of the great joys of coming to Boston is joining this remarkable community of arts leaders and educational leaders. It is a very tight group. There have been, over the course of the past 18 months, it's been an opportunity for me to learn a lot about what's happening in the city, and there is so much happening in the city. I joined the Boston Symphony at I think a point of inflection coming out of the pandemic, when arts and culture, and particularly classical music, has been struggling to kind of reassert its point of view and its relevancy. But the Boston Symphony has been around serving Boston since 1881. In 1881, Henry Lee Higginson, who was a retired major from the Civil War, came back to Boston and decided that the city of Boston needed to have an orchestra that presented great music at an affordable price, which is what he said, to the as many people as possible in our city. And so for the past 144 years, the orchestra, I think, has been really striving for that. I will also say that I think one of we're talking about legacy institutions. One of the things that legacy institutions do is they learn. Healthy ones learn, but also legacy institutions, particularly institutions that have been around for 144 years, there's a lot of forgetting too. And part of our process going forward, and part of the reason that I'm energized by the work ahead at the Boston Symphony, is for us to, yes, kind of meet, partner, think differently about our organization and the way that we serve, but also to relearn and unforget some of those founding principles that really were embedded in the BSO in 1881. The BSO is a large organization. We serve about 1 million attendees, audience members a year across 2 campuses here in Boston. The BSO runs Symphony Hall, but we also have a campus for music and learning out in Western Massachusetts called Tanglewood, which is about 400 acres dedicated truly, singularly in the world for music, learning, lingering, and dreaming. And so that is a part of our legacy too.
No, thank you for that. So we'll probably zoom out a little bit and then we'll zoom in. When I became the leader at Community Music Center of Boston, I remember my first annual meeting. Multiple things happened at that annual meeting, but one thing that happened in particular was I was sharing about this vision for Community Music Center and what it could be going forward and what I believed in and what my values were. Um, and a question came from someone in the room, which is, well, don't you feel like that is a departure from what the organization is and has been? And fortunately, I had done my homework and had learned about the organization, and it was an organization founded in 1910, and its purpose was to provide music instruction for immigrant children in the South End. It was the neighborhood community music school in the South End. That was its founding. That was what it was meant for. And so I shared with this person, I was like, actually, I believe that this is a strengthening of its past. This isn't a departure from its past. I say that because, Chad, I'll come to you. You brought up history, and sometimes you are evolving a culture, and sometimes you are returning to a culture, or you're incorporating the past, present, and future in your current culture. So I'll start with you, but I'll love for the two of you to respond to that as well. What are the ways in which, when you thought about this new moment in your history, that you thought about it from a cultural perspective, where we were not only honoring the present and thinking about the future, but also simultaneously honoring the past as well? I mean, Chad, I'll start with you, because I know you and I have talked a lot, and I know that's a lot of our conversation is around this idea of culture. So I'd love for you to
Over
share.
1 or 2 bottles of sake, I will remember. So I think that's right. I think one of the oh, we will. So I think one of the things that has been a real moment of learning for me is I was drawn to the Boston Symphony for a number of reasons. I was a student here in Boston back in the 90s. I was a history major at Tufts. I was a music major, a singer at NEC. And this was an orchestra that was run by Seiji Ozawa at that time. And it was this extraordinary history of innovation, an extraordinary history of pushing our art form forward and elevating and amplifying the voices of artists. And that's what I remembered. And when this opportunity came up, I came to Boston, and I think there was a lot of fear. I came from LA. That is enough to inspire fear in Bostonians, I learned. But I was coming from LA, and I was coming from a place where the tradition that I was used to was the tradition of the new. And here, there is this very serious association in all of our institutions about our past. And that's one of the things that gives strength, I think, to the institutions in Boston. And it is absolutely can be an anchor which prevents us from going forward. And I ran up against that straight away. Like, we're happy you're here. We want you to kind of do new things, as long as you don't do anything differently from the way that we've done them in the past. And what I had to do is a little bit of what Lecolion said, was say, no, like, part of our past is innovation. Part of our past is service. We're a nonprofit for a reason. We're a great orchestra. Yes, we play music at the very highest level. But our purpose is not to perpetuate ourselves. Like, the BSO does not exist to perpetuate itself. We exist to serve audiences. We exist to serve our communities. We exist to uplift and amplify the voices of artists and allow them to tell the stories that our world needs to hear. And we as an institution are constituted and capitalized in order to advance our art form. That's why we exist. The mechanism by which we do it are the concerts and the artists that we engage. All of our roles in kind of populating the Boston Symphony is about that purpose. And that was not a way, I think, that the Boston Symphony was talking about itself. And you know, one of the things that we talked about is that, well, what about excellence? Where does excellence come into play? And I believe in excellence. I believe in excellence but I believe in excellence in everything that we do. We can't cherry pick excellence. So yes, we have to have the most excellent musicians and artists on our stage, but we have to be excellently serving our communities. We have to be excellently preserving these buildings for the generations to come. We have to be excellently communicating with the broad and diverse communities across Boston. That's excellence too. And when we started kind of reclaiming excellence, but using it as a bar by which we judged all of our work, I think people started to see the change that could be coming ahead.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you for that. That was church. So thank you for that. Aisha, Vanessa, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the culture and the things that you were thinking about as a new leader, the things you were helping your organization to evolve that actually set the stage for these really important moments that you're existing in right now.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I have been at EVA a bit longer than Chad, maybe too long, but I have been at EVA actually for 22 years. And when I came to EVA, I was kind of the new kid on the block, literally, and immediately faced, the culture changes that similar, an organization with a wonderful track record, but with a lot of challenges. And also an organization that wanted to look into the future, but kind of didn't know how. So really transforming that, changing that mindset, figuring out what the path forward was critical and important for us. So for the first, I would say, 6 years, I really spent time just turning the organization around. And it's interesting to say it now, but it's interesting to understand why it took so long, right? And that was part of that culture. How do you change the culture? How do you bring people along? How do you create impact? And how do you build that impact based on excellence, which is an important value that we want to uphold? But also over the years, so there have been different iterations, different strategic plans that we have done and completed and refreshed for the new one. But the reality is that all these changes have helped us transform, grow, be more impactful, and really more intentional about our work, impact, and equity. So given our founders, we're not as old, even though I'm probably the oldest in my position. EVA is not as old as the BSO or the Community Music Center. We definitely were very and still are very rooted in our values that from our founders, and at the same time serving low-income, moderate-income communities, the Puerto Rican community in Boston, and other multicultural and racial communities. But really, how do we do our work with the intentional mindset of equity, of creating real opportunities for the families that we serve, and using different tools, including the arts, to create that impact, and also to help people build generational wealth. So really looking at home ownership programs, financial empowerment, building assets and credit, and all those important elements that individuals and families need to push forward and to build a better future for themselves. So we have, over the years, transforming our organization to really think more and more and more in those terms. Similarly, really thinking from the beginning, as I mentioned, we have seen the arts as an important vehicle for us to build community, but also how do we do that, and how we intentionally seek out partners to work together to bring our culture elsewhere and to bring others into our community. So that also includes growth. So we're building a new space, La Casa, the Center for Arts, Self-Determination and Activism on West Newton Street in the South End, with a new performance space that will host all of our programs and services, and will also allow us to build more housing in our current spaces, convert our current spaces into more affordable housing for the city and the neighborhood. So it's that kind of transformation, and it's constant learning. Change is hard, and change management is important in terms of bringing people along, engaging them, communicating, planning, all of those elements of change management. Yeah. But I think those are critical to really propel the organization forward. For example, we see La Casa as part of that legacy of building a space for the next generation of artists, activists, leaders, and we will invite all of them to really continue to build into a more inclusive and equitable future, which in this moment in history does, feels like very difficult to do.
Yeah.
But I think this is also a moment not only to resist and push back on things, but also to reimagine what the future looks like.
No, thank you for that. Aisha, I'm going to ask you a different question, actually, because your response made me think about there's a researcher, his name is Paul Gorski. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Paul Gorski, but he's an equity researcher, and he talks about the idea of pace. And I believe he coined the phrase, the pace of privilege, rather than the pace of change. The way that Paul Gorski describes it is there's a pace of privilege, and essentially the pace of privilege is that you move at the pace at which the largest group of privileged people are comfortable moving. So you're moving at the pace of the privilege of those inside an institution, which typically does not mirror the pace of change, because the pace of privilege is actually quite slow. And so you're trying to typically, when you're going through an evolutionary period, that's my question coming to you will be with this in mind about the idea of pace. You're trying to balance this idea conceptually between the pace of change in relationship to the pace of privilege and trying to find an appropriate balance there. So I'm curious, as you've been part of your organization, and there has been a lot of things that have moved forward, I think, during your time. How have you thought about this idea of managing the pace?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think it was interesting, Vanessa, to hear you say that institutional turnaround took 6 years, because I'm 5 years into presidency. And I do feel as if the first 4 years were all about making sure people knew that this college was on strong footing, that we were demonstrating growth, that we made good on the promise to move, and that we did that while remaining true to the Boston roots of an organization that was actually founded in 1790 by Benjamin Franklin, who left money to the city of Boston for 2 purposes: to advance apprenticeship for those who wanted it, not exactly for people who look like me, but that's okay, because we've changed that now, and also to advance entrepreneurship for people who already had a trade. And interestingly enough, I felt as if, and so did the board who hired me, we needed to run as fast as we could, because we had been moving at this pace of privilege. The intention to sell our South End site, build a new site somewhere. We hadn't purchased the Roxbury site. We purchased that in 2019, but I joined the organization in 2018 before that site had been purchased. But that idea had been around for 15 years, 10, 15 years, being socialized in various ways and reported on in various ways, and trying, to move the agenda forward. And really, I felt it very important to race, to sprint and say, it's now or never. I became the head leader of this organization at the sort of nadir, the dark days, the pre-vaccine days of COVID, and also in a time that was very different in terms of racial equity and DEI. And we're an organization where most of our students are men of color. And so there was a lot that felt very urgent, and still does, but life and death urgency in terms of where we all were in the world. So, that's how, and since then, we've had to slow down, because you can't sprint forever. Once we hit some certain milestones, it was important that we paced ourselves as an organization and took a different hit a different stride. And that's where we are now. So we're still moving at pace. Our building will be finished in November. We'll move in January. But to sprint all the time is not sustainable. And so it's interesting and a challenge to be continuing to present urgency and also to privilege rest and reflection, which are important for longevity in this work.
Chad, I'll likely ask you to respond to that as well, but I will share a little bit. But at Community Music Center Boston, in my first few years, we were having a lot of conversations about change, and sometimes the conversation about change feels like change. Right? We were doing the same things. We were working in the same programs, doing the same in the same communities, working with the same students. But the conversation around the idea of change made some people feel unsettled. And the fact that the conversation was happening regularly felt like change. I'm not from Boston. It feels like a Boston thing. This idea of a conversation being a marker of progress. And in my opinion, it isn't. It rarely is. I can't feed my kids with a conversation. Right? So typically you need actual progress in order for progress to become real. And so as the organization has moved forward, we have definitely evolved and made some changes. And but one of the things that I started to learn was this idea that the conversation around change, around this vision, this thing that you see in the future, feels fast, even if you're not moving maybe even much at all. And so this idea of the pace of privilege and pace of change is something that has always resonated with me conceptually. So Chad, I'm curious as some of the conversations that you and I have had, and actually what I respect about you a ton is that you do this publicly. I mean, I have been at your galas. I have seen you in multiple spaces that are extremely public. And this idea of talking about this new future is very unapologetic, I think, and very brave. And so I'm curious, when you think about this idea of pace and change and privilege, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that as well.
Thank you. And Aisha, that so resonated with me, this idea that you can't sprint forever. But sprinting is really important. When I got here, again, I want to start by saying I love the Boston Symphony. Like it was the orchestra that I learned what classical music is supposed to sound like with. And it still inspires me when I hear those players playing at just the very, very highest level of excellence. It's inspiring to me. And when I arrived, there were a lot of things that surprised me. And I recognized, and I have a couple of my trustees here, so we're going to pull back the curtain. But one thing that I realize is that you have a short window in which you have tremendous opportunity to actually create an infrastructure for change. And it's that wet cement period that a new leader has, where you can put your handprints all over it and you can carve your initials into it and you can, before it dries. And so one of the things that I decided I wanted to do was to kind of make some big moves early on, before the when I still had momentum and I wasn't fighting inertia. And this is a big thing. Arts institutions, legacy institutions often have a lot of inertia. And what we want are arts institutions, legacy institutions, to have momentum. So I put in place, I also recognize that arts leadership comes from artists. And if we want to have a different perspective, you have to have different perspectives making decisions. So I created something called the Humanities Institute, which was an architecture for change. It allowed me to invite artists whose voices weren't at the table to be at the table, to have space for them to actually make an imprint in our work, and to do it within this thing that felt safe for the people in our organization who are like, oh, it's happening here, it's okay. But what I think everyone is realizing now is that architecture is now the architecture that we are building the future of the Boston Symphony on. That it is a more democratic space, that it is a place that welcomes diverse opinions, and artists who have into the sandbox, and giving them assets, giving them the assets that we have aggregated over 144 years to use in ways that perhaps we have been unable to see. And it's destabilizing, and it's intentionally destabilizing. My first 18 months, there was intentional destabilization, not enough to make people fall, but just for there to be enough like sense of like, what's he gonna say next? And then, I feel like I'm at that point after 18 months where we have to kind of restabilize, right? And now we have to begin to say, I have to be able to show that change is impactful, that we're getting some wins. We're seeing programs that are engaging artists in different ways, that we have partnerships with our colleagues across the city where they see the BSO as an option, or they see the BSO as a possibility to engage with, and that we see these partnerships as opportunities for us to learn. So it's been super interesting. The second big thing was, and I'll just, my process, we started a strategic planning process almost within days of my arrival. Again, super unusual. But we've allowed ourselves to bring our constituencies together within this framework to talk about who we are and really interrogate these words, interrogate these values. And what I'm really happy with is that the values that have emerged over this 18-month process are ones that kind of relearn our founding principles: service, a humble organization in a constant state of learning, excellence in everything that we do in our guiding our decision making, innovation. How are we kind of constantly questioning every part of our business to see if it is operating in the way that it should in 2025? And finally, a sense of belonging. That was something that was foundational back in 1881. In 1885, our founding board created something called the Boston Pops, which was literally to democratize music in our city by welcoming different musical traditions into this hall. 1900, Symphony Hall was built as the first democratic hall in the world. It was a concert hall that was a place to hear classical music at the highest, as one of the truly great spaces for classical music. But you also could take out the floor and put in tables, and it became a great music hall where jazz artists and world music artists and artists from the theater and were all invited in. So when I talk about the fact that the Boston Symphony has learned a lot over 44 years, we also have forgotten some of those things. And the process of strategic planning is saying, oh, we're now fighting against some of the things that we started. We're pushing back on some of these things and saying that's not who we are, when in fact, it's not only who we are, we started it. And that has been a process of really like, I think actually turning a corner with the organization, that there's trust now that we can own the totality, the great part of our history, some the places where we failed, but we can own the totality of our history.
That's just well said. Thank you. I want to open it up to some of our youth employees, and there were some questions that resonated with me. Actually, can you take Chad's? Because this one, Saomi, I want to make note of one of your questions because you spoke from the perspective of a Hispanic person. Do you have your question available to you right now? I would love it if you asked that question to our panel.
Okay, first I'm going to introduce myself really briefly. I'm Saomi. I'm a youth employee for CMCB, and I've worked here for, I think, 3 years. I don't know. I'm an artist. I'm bad at math, but I've worked here for long enough that I feel like I know like how the institution works, and I'm getting really like comfortable with like just how arts and administrations function in general. So yeah, thank you to Lecolion for the opportunity to be here. Thank you. But yeah, my question, and honestly, this is something that all of you can answer and speak to for your communities, but mainly I was curious about what Vanessa had to say, as I'm also a Hispanic person, and coming from, you know, my perspective and the experiences of the Hispanic community, we tend to see organizations and people in positions of power and just as just these like nebulous things that seem to orchestrate things in our lives, and that can create a sense of like untrust and a sense of like not understanding what happens behind that wall. So I wanted to understand like if that's something that like each of you deal with in your communities or with the people that you serve, and how you build that layer of trust like for your communities.
Please.
Sure, I can start. That is very real, and is definitely, it happens in our community, per se. So part of the evolution of EVA and growing to what it is now was to create opportunities for growth. And that meant we needed to merge certain aspects of our organizations and get rid of some others. And that created a good level of mistrust, even within the community, about what does that look like? What does that mean? What are we losing in the process? So, sometimes change moves at the pace of privilege, but also it moves at the pace of trust. And you need to create that trust. You need to really communicate. You have to engage people. You have to organize around what your goals are and help people understand, feel comfortable, and listen, because you may have a blind side or you may not be understanding some of the challenges from others person's perspective. I think that's those are critical things that happen definitely internally for EVA, but when we then look externally, it happens too. There is, generally speaking, our committees have been left out from the tables of opportunities and access, and people feel that means we're not either welcome or we're discriminated, and that those feelings run deep in our communities in general, and definitely in the Latino community. So part of working around that is reaching out to others who are different, to organizations that, if partnering with them, we can create the kind of synergy to bring people along and understand differences. And the arts, among other things, are important in doing that, because through the arts, you build bridges, right? And through the arts, people and creative expression, people can understand different perspectives and sit, next to each other, especially music. So one example of that, and like that, we have many examples of partnerships that we have created with many community organizations and institutions to build that trust, even within the neighborhood of the South End, which, as we all know, is a pretty gentrified neighborhood. And as the neighborhood has evolved into what it is now, we have had to build bridges with our new neighbors, right? We were there before they came along, and there were tensions. So how do we build that trust and bridges with our new neighbors in the South End? But going back to building partnerships with organizations, I'm very excited to say to you all today that we are in partnership with a BSO, which had never happened. And it has felt, this process of partnering with a BSO and bringing the Puerto Rico Symphony Orchestra to Symphony Hall in the fall, it has felt like an opportunity to really reimagine and rethink what classical music is, what opportunities our communities will have in coming into a beautiful space as Symphony Hall is, and to really learn from that rich history and feel that they're welcome and feel that they are heard and they are seen. And hopefully that will continue to evolve into opportunities for the orchestra to then come to the neighborhood, and not just the South End, but really more broadly with the Latino community and all other communities of color. So really creating that sense of representation and belonging and inclusion that I think is so important to build that trust. So those are some examples that we have used, but certainly creating this kind of partnership between two organizations that are very different in every sense, as you've heard, including its leadership and its tenure, the tenure of the leaders, is truly, really exciting.
Yeah, actually, I want to respond to that one too, from the perspective of CMCB. And when I was in Memphis, I was able to be part of this community engagement fellowship, where it was 5 months of just learning how to do appropriate work in communities in Memphis. One of them was a neighborhood called Orange Mound, and Orange Mound in Memphis, Tennessee, was or is one of the first places in America where Black people were able to own the structures and the land. So it was one of the first places. The other one was Harlem. But then Orange Mound and Harlem were in this same space, and they have gone through different trajectories. So we were given this opportunity to work in Orange Mound, and one of the great things I learned in that fellowship, I think there were actually it's a couple of the great things. One was, if you want people to go to your stuff, you got to start by going to their stuff. Right. And so I never forgot that conceptually, that if I've never been to someone's thing, how can I be an appropriate partner? How can I ask them to engage with me if I've never been there? And the other thing that I learned, and I grew up in a Black neighborhood right outside Dallas, and oftentimes in my neighborhood, I would be the last person to find out what was coming or what was in my neighborhood. People would just put things there. I tell this story a lot about a basketball league I was in, because again, there's a lot of colonizing that happens in disinvested communities. This basketball league I was in, there was a brother in the neighborhood who used to carry this mesh bag. It had the same jerseys, same balls, same cones. He coached, 9 different teams, and we would then play games on Saturdays. My brother did that for years. One year, this nonprofit came along, and they got money to do. They're like, oh, Black kids love basketball, so let's start a league in a Black neighborhood. That nonprofit got some funding, and so they did this program for about 3 years. They lost the funding, and then the basketball program left. Their program left. The guy who had been doing this basketball program for a long time, he wasn't doing basketball programs anymore. He had moved on. And so by this organization's involvement in my community, they destroyed something that had been going on for a very long time. I say those two things to just name that when we thought about our relationship to Roxbury, we wanted to try to think about building relationships long before a press release ever went out. So we bought that building in, what was it, January of 23? Is that right? 24, January of 24. And from January of 24 through March of 24, I was taking one-on-one meetings with as many people in this neighborhood as I could in this place. We were always meeting right here. And by the time the press release went out, people in some places were like, I just heard. People in Roxbury were like, oh, y'all just heard? We've been knowing that for months. And I think that the way to build trust is, I think that one way I think very much is by thinking of a very grassroots level of getting to know people. So it's not having large meetings and inviting people. It's not having a Zoom meeting. It's actually really trying to understand a community well enough to where you have met everyone that everyone else can think of that you should meet. And you keep doing that until you don't get a new name, until you get back to the beginning. So if I got to a point to where people were recommending, do you know Norm Stembridge? And I was like, yes, I know. Yes, I know Norm. And so when I got back to Norm, I was like, okay, I think that we have a critical mass of folks that we know individually. And I think that organizations who are trying to build trust, they miss the grassroots part. And it wasn't just meeting with CEOs, it was meeting with community organizers, it was meeting with folks who worked at the public library, people who worked at the Y, making sure that I was a person who I localized my own, and I live in Roxbury, so it helps, but I was also trying to do as many things in the neighborhood as possible. I think to you, I love that you talked about trust, this idea of the pace of trust, because I think a lot of places forget that You have to build trust, and not only building it, but building a critical mass of trust. So it's not just getting the right people to trust you, it's getting the largest group of people to be able to trust you as well. And I think that is such an important part, because what I learned in all those conversations in Roxbury is that it's a community that has been has had broken promises. There have been promises that have been made that have just been broken consistently. So there is this healthy skepticism around any promises that people made. It was Roxbury where I learned I don't believe anything until they dig a hole. Dig a hole. Don't send out a press release. When you dig a hole, I'll believe you mean that thing, but not until then. And so, and again, it was this idea of trust, depending on certain communities, because there is this amount of skepticism there. That's a significant portion of it. Before I go to the next question, did anyone want to add anything?
I was just thinking a little bit about the, we talk a lot about kind of equity and diversity, and one of the things that you brought up, which I think is also important, I've realized more and more, is that the generational perspective is something that we in my industry, classical music, we've ignored for a long, long time. And for those of you who are involved in classical music, you understand that one of the first things that people say is, what are you going to do to get young people? How are you going to, the audiences are really, I love any ticket buyer, any age. I want to be very clear about that. But there's always this question of like, how are you going to get young people in? And then you look at kind of the people who are making decisions, and there aren't a lot of young people. So part of what, and this is hard to do, particularly in an institution like, a historical institution, but it's something that we are trying to do. Something I'm trying to do is to say, we need to capture that hot blue flame of youth that happens at a certain point in a person's life when the idealism of how the world can be better hasn't been beaten down by the world. And we need to give people in that generation, young people in that generation, opportunities to make decisions. And I remember I was like, I got one. I was in my late 20s. I had moved to Los Angeles. It was a time of great change there. The orchestra was building a new concert hall, but designed by Frank Gehry downtown. And they said to me, you know what, we have this thing, the Hollywood Bowl, just go figure out what to do with it while we're focused on building Frank's building. I had no business making any decisions for an 18,000 seat venue in the center of Los Angeles. And yet I did. And I was able to try these things that I was like, oh, I don't know. Let's see how this goes. I'd like this. And it reminds me today that, like, again, we need to kind of put people, younger people, into decision-making positions if we want to kind of understand what the next generation is looking for and their expectations are. So part of what we're doing on our staff side is creating positions for generations of leaders who are in their 20s and 30s, where they have actual seat at the table, where they actually have kind of dollars that they can spend, decisions that they can make. And it's a culture change. It's probably something that you think about naturally in your business, but in our business, it tends to be fairly kind of a scary proposition.
I want to get to another question, but I do just want to offer that one of the things that I think is important in building trust is clarity of intention, and then backing up that clarity of intention with results. One of the things that we did under my tenure is was unconventional. We wanted to grow, and in higher education, most of the time you grow by adding programs, by adding more majors. That's what you do. And with the Dean of Academic Affairs who I hired, like, I actually think we should become even more niche than we already are. So we have 20 programs. We have this standard grid against which we are supposed to be evaluating our programs, but it turns out we hadn't been. And so there were programs that were very small that were, allowed to stay. There were programs that didn't have the outcomes that we wanted in terms of graduation rates, job placement rates, and earnings. that had been allowed to stay. And it was difficult, but we said, listen, we have these standards to which we say we hold ourselves accountable and we aren't. And we need to grow. And this is what we think we need to do. And that was a very difficult time. But the very next year, the programs we had remaining actually increased in enrollment. So it was against conventional wisdom, but we had a rationale for it. And once that happened, I think, people understood, and then we were consistent. So now when we say every 3 years, we evaluate our programs against these goals, we actually do it. And it has changed how people feel. Maybe it hasn't changed how people feel. It has changed how people understand the decisions that we make around program change, because we're being consistent. And new programs get 5 years. So, which was a question that somebody put to me, why does this program get to stay? And well, they're new, so we're giving them, but then we had to communicate that as well. So I think, the clarity of intention, the consistency of application, and, are you actually doing what you say you're going to do? And did it make the difference that you intended? And if it didn't, we also need to circle back and say, here's what we're going to do instead.
I want to open up to another youth employee who happens to be my son, so I will not respond to his question. But you mentioned something here about the kinds of shifts that the organizations are making, and it's some things that are a little bit more tactical. You've all have mentioned some very tactical things, but I'll be curious, Henning, if you don't mind asking your question around the shifts in the organization.
Yeah, so I understand that there are a lot of new relationships that are being built, especially between the four of you, as well as individually in your own organizations. So my question is, like, what kinds of shifts do you intend to make in your organizations as you move forward? Will they be more, outreach based, fundraising based, awareness based, like, et cetera, or a combination of all of them? Just trying to get an idea of, like, what kinds of things we might see coming from you guys next.
Well, one of the things that I think is important for us as a trade organization is to really figure out what the mechanical arts means. We're in this building that was built in 1908. Actually, your comments, Chad, led me to understand a lot more about why our auditorium is a 1/3 replica of Symphony Hall. I didn't fully understand that. Oh, we appreciate it, but I'm like, oh, okay, this was.
It's literally a 1/3.
It is.
Of Symphony Hall.
Yes, acoustically, and because it was meant to be a gathering space, and I think a wonderful, ripple effect of the innovation that the BSO was. But one of the things on my idea list is something I love the arts. To start something called Performances with the President, which is just once a semester that we actually participate in. We are in the middle of this cultural district, and so many of our students haven't participated in any. They haven't been to the Boston Center for the Arts. They haven't heard the BSO, or maybe they have, but it was while they were a student, to the extent that they have. So, I think it's important to really think about recreation and not so much work, that you can't that you're crowding out your imagination. And our students work a lot, and they're in school full time, and many of them have families. And I would like to find a way for them to also have some recreation and reflection time as well. And then the second piece is, as we also, like Lecolion, have spent a lot of time building relationships in this neighborhood well before we purchased property in this neighborhood, well before we dug our hole. There's something, and well before me, frankly, but what does it look like to think about the entire community of Roxbury as our campus, and not one building? We are building one building, but there are ways in which we are looking to use the Roxbury branch of the library, other spaces around Madison Park, Community Development Corporation, and other places as spaces of inquiry, learning, and even programming some of our classes. So those are the things that are on not just my mind, but the mind of our leadership team as well.
It's a great. Can you hear me? There you go. It's a great question. And I would say A couple of things. I think what will change is your question, right? Based upon the partnerships and the conversations we're having. Well, first off, I think that for us at the BSO, it's a period where we have to step back and listen a lot. So I think that as a legacy institution, one of the things that a long-term legacy institutions sometimes fall into the trap of is kind of believing their own narrative that they've been telling for a long time, and calling that tradition. So part of it is really interrogating that tradition, interrogating our history, but also listening to our community and saying, how is it that we can serve, right? Start by saying, not by saying, what can we do for you, but how can we serve? And I'll give you an example. I had been, Lecolion, thankfully, is a part of a community, an organization that gives really great feedback to the BSO. It started a couple of years ago around Concert for the City, but it's really grown into a real forum for us to understand better the community needs of Boston. We were thinking, we're going to take our music out and we're going to kind of take our musicians and go and play in community centers all across the city and what we heard was, well, that's not really what we want. What we really want is to be able to come to Symphony Hall. The BSO has one of the great buildings in the world. We want access to the building. And it was like a revelation for our organization to say, oh, we have to think about our assets differently. We're a great orchestra. We play at the highest level. We were just in Europe. It was amazing. And we have some physical assets that are things that our community is invested in and interested in. So we started rethinking our Concert for the City. What if it wasn't about the BSO inviting people in to hear a free concert by the BSO, but what if it was an opportunity for us to invite partners in to perform in Symphony Hall, welcome families? And again, that was like a moment of where I think there was also a moment of pride, like, oh, this building still means something. What we have to do is step back. We have to allow people to come in, bring their organizations, perform in this space, and see it as their own. And it really kind of allowed us to say, how does that change the way that we think about our assets? So that's one example. I think there is an example, frankly, of an organization starting with centering ideas. And this is something that's really important to me, is that I want the BSO to start a planning process, when we think about what it is that we put on our stages, we start by kind of interrogating a set of questions. And those questions can be, what stories are artists needing to tell in this moment? And how does our work support the storytelling? And you'll start to see in our seasons going forward, like, artists are talking about climate. No surprise to anybody probably who's paying attention. Artists in our world are grappling with issues of faith at a time when kind of there is much kind of disagreement around the world. Articles of faith are becoming these things that are finding, I think, again, renewed urgency in music making. And artists are concerned with democracy. And so artists are wanting to tell stories that help us understand the state of the American democracy as it is today. Our job at the BSO is to be a platform for those stories. And we can also play Beethoven and Mahler and Tchaikovsky. We're a big organization. We give 400 concerts a year. It is a wide space that we can offer, but we have to listen and we have to center ideas. And so a part of our strategic planning process is saying, what would it take for the Boston Symphony to be the orchestra of service and the orchestra of ideas?
Thank you for that. Vanessa, did you want to add anything?
Sure. So we are in the midst of a 5-year strategy.
Yeah, no, you're hot.
There, we're in the third year of a 5-year strategic plan, and which is pretty ambitious and at the same time very grounded in our values and our goals for creating equity and opportunities in the community. But within that plan, there are a few things that are really exciting that we're really looking into leaning into it more. One of them, obviously, is the construction of La Casa, the Center for Arts, Self-Determination, and Activism, as that new space not only will give us opportunities for growth for our programs and expansion, but also will provide a new casa, a new house, a new home for our arts programs that have been unhoused now for several years, and will position this space as the largest Latino arts hub in the region and in New England. So we're very excited about that and really thinking about how we create this space to be not only the Latino arts hub, but also a community space, a true community space to bring, people in from all walks of life, not only to enjoy Latino arts, but really to present also their work, and how we can use this space as an affordable arts rehearsal and arts performing and arts presenting space for the entire city. So we're really excited about that particular piece of our plan. Another piece that we're really, really excited about is to continue to create affordable housing in the city in particular, and looking at potentially outside the city, but really in the city first. Next month, we're breaking ground on new housing units that we are building this year, 5 additional units to our portfolio. And that's really, truly important, and looking at building more both in the South End and in other neighborhoods of Boston. So that's critical. And last, among many things, I'm just picking 3 that are really important for us now that we're leaning into, is to create opportunities for families to build wealth, and to create opportunities for families who live in our neighborhood and in our housing that are ready to become homeowners to do so in a very challenging economic environment for homeownership in general, and more specifically for moderate income families. But we have been able to really dig into talking to our community, and this actually came from the community out of a process of listening in this strategic planning process that we started a few years back, that they had this, this desire, this willingness and readiness to take it to the next step, and how we could, we were doing financial empowerment programs, but how we would take this to the next level to really support without duplicating efforts, without recreating wheels. So we partner with a lot of community organizations that are ready to robust home ownership education, but leaning into that and really creating the opportunities and the paths for our residents to become homeowners. So those 3 things are things that we're very excited about in terms of looking into the future and really deepening our mission.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for those. Thank you for your fantastic responses. I want to open it up to some questions from you in the audience, and also from folks who are online. I'm not sure which camera I'm on, but from the folks who are online, if someone has an opportunity to check the chat, I did want to open it up to you. This is not just our desire to want to hear from the voices in the room. We wanted to make sure that we gave you all an opportunity to ask some questions. It's been a great conversation, and I think we've covered a lot of different areas. So if there's anything you want us to go deeper on, we're happy to do that. Or if there's something that this may be your one opportunity to have these 3 amazing leaders in the room to be able to chat with. And so I open it up to you if you have any questions. Please, if you don't mind sharing your name.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Anna. And I just graduated from Indiana University with a degree in arts management. So I'm really happy to be here, and it's like amazing to get to.
Where's our applause for that?
Oh, thanks, guys.
Congratulations.
So I'm really excited to be getting to hear all this great stuff from you guys. My question was about change and how that affects legacy institutions, specifically with their donor bases. What does that conversation look like when you're implementing change, and how do you either bring your donor base with you, or is change kind of enacting new donor bases, and can that be sort of a catalyst for change? And then a second question kind of going along with that, What role do you guys think legacy institutions play in supporting smaller institutions who may not have large donor bases and who also may have less access, especially now, to public funding? So
That is a hell of a
And
question.
are you looking for a job?
I know, exactly. That's a hell of a question. I'll respond to one of them, and I will open it up to you all to respond, just because one of them is near and dear to my heart. This idea of, and I shared this with an institution once that was having a conversation with them about racial equity, and about these developments that the institution was thinking about making. And they were like, well, we're really concerned that if we do these things, people are going to leave the organization. And I was like, wait a minute, who? Which one of you is leaving? You're in this room right now. Who are we talking about? Are we talking about one of you, or are we making people up? Because in my opinion, if the organization is like, we don't believe in having an equitable institution, and we don't believe in valuing all these voices and every voice that we have, we don't believe in uplifting communities, if we don't believe in ensuring that communities are safe from multiple different perspectives, they should go, right? If this organization has values, then let's make sure that we name them and that we're explicit about them. And if someone is like, actually, I'm not values aligned with you, well, then of course, those folks, maybe they're in the wrong place. It's an opportunity to be able to know that. But I think that what I have learned in my own organization, as well as I've spoken with others, once you're really clear and explicit about who you are, what you believe, and what you value and what your values are, generally speaking, you attract more people than you lose. So this idea of trying to stay in the middle, typically, that's where the fear is. The fear is in the middle. But if you actually are really rooted and solid in what your institution is and what your values are, then actually you have some comfort, because everything isn't for everyone. Everybody can't bring Nas, by the way, yo.
It only took us 50 years.
Yeah.
Hip hop has come to the Boston Symphony. I want to be clear.
That's right. I just want to I plug that. I've been plugging that. In Tanglewood, they're having this great hip hop artist named Nas is going to be there in a couple of weeks. But anyway, but what I would say is, sorry, I digress, because I'm still like I'm so jacked about that. But I will say that an organization that is rooted in its values, I think it allows itself to be magnetic, and sometimes it can be repellent. But I think that the organization must be rooted. It must be rooted in what it is. And generally speaking, people give related to their values, the things that they believe in. And so when your values are clear, and for my organization anyway, the clearer our values became, the greater our giving became. Because people were like, wow, we're not only talking about a thing, we're talking about a system. We're talking about values, and that is worth supporting, not only alongside the thing, but maybe even greater than the thing itself, because the thing is a vehicle for a thing rather than just being a thing. So I, generally speaking, tend to believe that fear, more often than not, it's really helpful to say, which major giver are we going to lose if we do this? And let's have a conversation with them. Like, why? And then you find out maybe this is a group or an individual or a foundation or whatever who actually won't be on this journey with us. But I do believe, and what's happened to Community Music Center of Boston is that we have gotten more people coming in than we've lost, like by multiples of 10.
Yeah, I would echo that. I would say you kind of hit it on the head. Like, mostly it's like dating, right? I haven't dated for a while, but like when you go on the first date, right? 1% about the person, but you have a full picture of that person in your head. It's just based upon 1% of actual information. And as you get to know them, go on a second date, you get 2%. And then you go and you get 16%. And at a certain point, the image, the actual image of the person, who they are, becomes clear. And you make a decision like, yeah, you know what? This isn't the right, or you know what? I'm all in. I think it happens on the other side too, right? With change, people have, I've found that people are comfortable with change up until the moment change happens. But more people are uncomfortable with change until you actually talk about what the change is. The fear colors the picture of what is going to happen. You assume the worst. And so, and I will also talk about from the donor community, because I think it's a great question. But what I have experienced is that when you get people in a room and you just start talking about it, here's what it looks like. Here's why we're doing this. Here's my thinking, right? Here's the data. Here's kind of how we're thinking about it from an analytic perspective. Here's how we're thinking about it from a moral perspective or an ethical perspective. Like 99.9% of the time, people go, oh yeah, I can be on board for that. And there are occasionally times when you go, well, a donor will do something and you go, you know what, I think we are values disaligned or non-aligned. But change really only happens if your donor community is with you. To be very, very candid. And as arts organizations, that is because the way that we do things is typically the most efficient way of doing something in the most inefficient business. Arts organizations are ridiculously inefficient, right? We spend more money than we make, which is why people donate, right? But they are the most efficient version of that inefficient business. So change just tends to, in the first kind of phases of change, cost more money. If you don't have your donor community with you, bought into that, then you can't get to the other side. And so I will say, like, you have to bring them along, right? You have to bring them along. Or I would say in the Boston Symphony's case, one of the things that really kind of brought me to the BSO was our donor community, our board was ahead of the institution in wanting change. Now that happens very, very rarely. But our because the BSO had gone through a real series of, I think, challenging times that's been pretty well documented over the past 5 or 6 years, the trustees and the donor community came together and said, we've got to do things differently. We want to be the organization that our city needs. And so for us on the staff, it is actually kind of catching up, understanding kind of how far we can go with that donor community, and then kind of following through with it. But I don't think that you can fundamentally make real change if you don't have your donor community with you.
I like to add, Anna, that great question. And I want to double click on everything that they have said, so I won't repeat it. But that in the case of EBA, for example, not only we have a donor community, but we also have a lender community, because we borrow money to develop housing and to preserve housing and to rehab, renovate housing. So we have had this same experience that Lecolion and Chet are talking about with donors, with lenders as well, in which we have had changes that we want to implement and that have been, questioned. So these are risks that we take all the time as part of the work, as part of the job. But I think to their point, the communication is like everything, right? Engaging people, talking about your values and why this is happening, and helping them understand the importance of that and how that makes them better too, right? And their investments better. I think it's important. And yes, you lose one here or there, but most people come along. So, but I just wanted to add that it's not just donors. Great question.
No, well, thank you. Well, thank you for that question. We're at our time. I know we ran over just a little bit, but I want to first of all thank the 3 panelists. A round of applause for them. I want to thank those of you online as well for showing up to us. We'll appreciate having you all here. And we wish you could have come in person. We have great wine and food, but hopefully we'll be able to see you in person next time. And then for those of you who are here in person, thank you so much. It's a beautiful day out. I imagine it was very difficult to be indoors for an hour and a half on a beautiful day like this. My son says the same thing. He's like, Dad, can you talk to Summer and tell it to fight back? But so I'm sure that many of you are wanting to enjoy this beautiful night. So again, thank you all so much for coming. This is the beginning of a conversation. This is an ongoing conversation in all of our organizations. We hope that you will be the kinds of people who we can count on, to Anna's question, to be with us as we are continuing to move forward. And we're hoping that you will continue to be part of the conversation with us as well. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.